The room felt strange, unfamiliar. I had no idea how I ended up here. That thought pulsed through Evelyn's mind as her vision adjusted to the harsh fluorescent light overhead. She was lying on a cold, hard surface, her head pounding in rhythm with the flickering glow. The ceiling above her was a flawless white square, unmarked except for the lone light panel, which hovered like a miniature caged sun. With effort, she pushed herself upright, pressing a hand to her temple. The skin there was sore, though she had no recollection of hitting her head. In fact, she struggled to recall much of anything beyond driving down Route 16 in the pouring rain, the windshield wipers keeping pace with a half-forgotten tune on the radio. The space around her was small, maybe 15 feet across, with pristine white walls that mirrored the ceiling's emptiness. No windows, no doors, no apparent way in or out. She should have felt a surge of panic, but instead an eerie calm settled over her, thick and smothering, dulling her senses rather than sharpening them. Scattered throughout the room were a handful of objects, each seemingly arranged with deliberate precision. A clock hung on the wall opposite her, its face fractured in a web of cracks. The hands were frozen at 2:17, though whether it was morning or night was impossible to tell in this timeless void. That number, 2:17, tugged at something in her memory, but like everything else, it remained just beyond reach. Beneath the clock sat a small table, and atop it lay a leather-bound journal. Evelyn was certain it hadn't been there moments ago. She blinked, but the table remained. It must have always been there, she reasoned. She had just overlooked it. Slowly, she rose to her feet. Her limbs felt stiff, reluctant, as though she had been motionless for an eternity. The air was thick, resisting her movements, turning every step into an act of will. As she neared the table, her reflection flickered across its polished surface, and her breath caught. The face staring back at her was hers, but older, more worn. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, deeper than she remembered. She reached for the journal, but midway her hand hesitated. Something else had appeared on the wall behind the table. A framed photograph of a little girl in a yellow dress, perched on a swing. The child's face was unmistakably hers, yet she had no recollection of the moment captured in the image. The swing's chains seemed to shift subtly, stretching and shortening when glimpsed from the edge of her vision. A whisper brushed against her ear, so soft it could have been imagined. She spun around, but the room was empty. And yet, the clock. Had it moved? She could have sworn it had shifted 3 inches to the left. This place wasn't just unfamiliar, it was impossible. And the longer she stood here, the more she felt as if something unseen was watching, waiting. She finally touched the journal, and a chill ran through her. The cover was unnervingly warm, like living skin, and when she turned a page, the paper gave off a faint, sorrowful sound, like distant weeping. The pages were blank at first, but they trembled under her gaze, as though words were trying to push their way to the surface. Evelyn dropped the journal back onto the table, pressing her palms against her closed eyes until colors danced behind them. When she looked again, the first page was no longer empty. Words had appeared, written in handwriting she recognized as her own, yet she had no memory of writing them. Day 37. The doctors say there's no change. They don't think I can hear them, but I do. Mom hasn't left my side. I wish I could tell her I'm still here. Her heart pounded against her ribs. As she stared, another entry materialized, the ink seeping up through the page like something bleeding through from another world. Day 58. The machines keep beeping. Someone's crying. I think it's Sarah. Her sob was always so distinct. I want to reach out to hold her hand, but I can't move. I can't wake up. No, Evelyn whispered, stumbling backward. Her heel snagged on something, a loose thread in the carpet perhaps, and she nearly lost her balance. As she steadied herself, her fingers brushed against the wall, and the surface rippled beneath her touch, like disturbed water. Then came the voices. A chorus of whispers, rising from nowhere and everywhere at once. Familiar voices, layered over one another. Brain activity is stable, but just need you to wake up, sweetie. Insurance will cover the extended care. Evelyn's breath came in shallow gasps. The whispers grew louder, pressing in from all sides. And deep down, beneath the confusion and the fear, one terrifying realization took root. She wasn't just trapped in this room, she was trapped between worlds. The voices were no longer just around her, they were inside her head. Evelyn pressed her hands against her ears, but it did nothing to silence them. On the wall, the photograph had changed. The little girl was gone. In her place was an image of a hospital room. A woman lay motionless in the bed, tubes snaking from her arms and nose, the dim green glow of monitors casting an eerie hue over her slack features, her own features. A single sharp tick rang out from the clock, slicing through the whispers like a knife. Evelyn's gaze snapped to it. The crack in its face had spread, branching outward in a pattern that resembled a human neural network, intricate and unsettling. Something shifted at the edge of her vision, a flicker of fabric. Turning her head, she saw it, a curtain, heavy, dark red, and impossibly regal against the stark emptiness of the room. It hadn't been there before, but in this place, where reality twisted like a dream, certainty was a fleeting thing. Behind her, the journal's pages rustled, flipping on their own, the dry sound reminiscent of dead leaves scraping across pavement. The whispers swelled, urgent now, and the walls seemed to breathe with them, expanding and contracting like a living thing. Evelyn stepped toward the curtain. In the reflective sheen of the polished floor, her image warped and stretched, aging with each step until it was barely human. When she finally reached out, the fabric burned like ice beneath her fingers. "Please," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was pleading with or what she was begging for. "Please, let me understand." With a swift motion, she yanked the curtain aside. A mirror loomed before her, spanning from floor to ceiling. But the woman staring back wasn't simply her reflection. It was her from an impossible future. Gaunt, her skin drawn tight over sharp bones, streaks of gray lacing through her tangled hair. Her eyes were wild, filled with recognition and terror. Then the reflection moved on its own. Its hands slammed against the glass, mouth shaping a silent, desperate scream. "Wake up!" A sound like ice cracking rang through the air as fissures spread across the mirror's surface. The older version of herself continued to pound against the barrier, each impact sending jagged fractures racing outward. The whispers had become a roar, and now she could distinguish the words. Severe head trauma from the impact. Found her car wrapped around a tree at 2:17 a.m. Might never regain consciousness. The walls pulsed faster, their once sterile white hue shifting to the soft pink of living tissue. The clock's hands spun backward in a dizzying blur, and the photograph on the wall began cycling through images like a rapid slideshow. Her own face in a hospital bed, herself driving through the storm, herself as a child on the swing, herself lying broken in the wreckage of her car, herself in this room, herself in this room, herself in this room. Her reflection mouthed the words again, "You have to remember." And suddenly, she did. The rain had been relentless that night. She had been on the phone with her mother, arguing about moving back home after the divorce. Tears blurred her vision, or maybe it had been the rain when the deer materialized in her headlights. She swerved. There was a tree, an impact, the sickening sound of metal screaming against wood, and then the room. But it had never been just one room, had it? There were hundreds, thousands, each a loop within her fractured consciousness, her mind constructing endless walls to shield itself from the truth. Every time she neared the answer, the room would shift, reset, and she would forget once more. The mirror shattered. Behind the shattered mirror lay a dark passage twisting and warping in impossible ways. A gust of cold air rushed past her, thick with the sterile scent of a hospital room. Her reflection had vanished, but its final words echoed through her mind. "Wake up." Evelyn stepped forward, shards of glass crunching beneath her feet. The passage pulsed with dim blue light, its walls shifting with intricate neural patterns that rippled like living circuitry. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though she were wading through deep water, the air itself thick and resistant. Behind her, a sound sent a shiver down her spine, the tinkling chime of glass reassembling. She turned and saw the mirror reforming, the room she had just left becoming whole once more. But it was no longer empty. A woman stood inside, looking around in confusion and fear. Her face was identical to Evelyn's. "The room is unfamiliar," the other woman murmured. "I don't know how I got here." Before Evelyn could react, the passage collapsed behind her, but she barely noticed. Her mind was unraveling years of memories, or were they dreams? How many times had she been here? How many versions of herself had walked through that room, trapped in an endless cycle of forgetting and rediscovering?
The walls flared brighter, and the voices that had haunted her grew clearer. "Her brain activity is spiking. Get the doctor in here now. Evelyn, honey, can you hear me?" She recognized the last voice, thick with emotion. Her mother. Hope and desperation laced every syllable. The passage narrowed, forcing her to crawl. The walls pressed in, warm and alive, thrumming with electrical impulses that matched the rhythm of her thoughts. A memory surfaced. Her neurologist explaining how the brain protects itself from trauma. Some coma patients, he had said, create entire worlds in their minds, living out years in constructs where time bends and loops. The mind will do anything to shield itself from pain. The passage constricted further, panic clawing at her throat. Was this where it ended, trapped between synapses and half-formed dreams? But ahead, a pinpoint of white light glowed, growing brighter with each desperate inch she crawled. Images from the journal flickered through her mind, pages upon pages filled with desperate entries. Day 147, another loop completed. Day 294, almost remembered this time. Day 623, please, let this be the last time. Day 1089, the room is unfamiliar. She understood now. The room wasn't just a prison. It was a mechanism, a defense. Every time she neared consciousness, her mind reset the loop, shielding her from the truth, from pain, from waking up to a broken life. But it was also keeping her from healing. The light intensified. Behind her, she heard glass shatter again. Another version of herself waking up, another loop beginning. How many more times would this cycle repeat if she turned back now? She pushed forward, every movement an act of sheer will. The voices grew louder, insistent. The scent of her mother's perfume filled the air. A familiar hand gripped hers. Sarah's. She was so close, almost awake, almost. The light erupted around her. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Evelyn opened her real eyes. The hospital room was dim, yet it felt blinding after so long in the sterile whiteness of the other world. Machines beeped softly beside her. The sharp tang of antiseptic mingled with the comforting scent of her mother's perfume. Sarah's hand was warm in hers. "Doctor," someone called. "She's awake." Evelyn tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Instead, she squeezed Sarah's hand. A doctor appeared beside her, shining a light into her eyes. "Ms. Walker, do you know where you are?" She managed a weak nod. "Do you remember what happened?" The memories were clearer now. The rain, the car, the tree. Another nod. "You've been in a coma for 3 years," the doctor said gently. "There were times we weren't sure you'd ever wake up." 3 years. 3 years of the same room, the same journey, the same endless cycle. But something lingered at the edge of her mind, a shadow of doubt. As the doctor checked her vitals, Evelyn's gaze drifted to the window. Her reflection stared back at her. Tired, older, exactly like the woman she had seen in the mirror of the white room. And just beyond her reflection, for the briefest moment, she saw it. A stark, doorless space. Another Evelyn, just beginning to wake. "The room is unfamiliar," the other whispered. "I don't know how I got here." Evelyn tried to scream, to warn her, to break through the glass and shatter the illusion. But the image faded, dissolving like mist. Had she truly escaped? Or was this just another room?